Fresh off the heels of our horror movie draft, Moses, we're going to figure out the state of horror movies. What do you got to say for yourself?
It's a dark, spooky day. I've seen a lot of purple, which scares the shit out of me. But I think I can make it through a couple more minutes of all this terrifying ghoulishness.
Wow.
I don't even really know what that means.
When did we get Paul Harvey on this
podcast? That was incredible, actually. I wish I wrote that down.
And that little monster that nobody wanted.
The purpose of life is to die on the run.
Well, I mean, I'll move on. Hi, I'm Justin. I'm here, too. We're coming off of a long, spooky weekend, and we figured we kind of tack on to, we just did the draft a little while ago, but maybe talk about the state of horror movies a little bit. Thought that might be fun, so I'm excited to do it.
Yeah. I am Warvey Heinstein. Very happy to be here. It's been a long weekend for me as well. A little drinking in the woods, a little Halloween action, a lot of things going on. I'm tired, and I'm just going to do my best to properly critique everything that Moses says, and I hope that most of it is about horror movies, but we'll see what happens.
What are you drinking over there, pal?
Oh my God, I completely forgot. I actually have this. I've got myself a little bit of vodka in here and some sweet tea, which is honestly, it's the most refreshing thing that I've been drinking whiskey for like 3 fucking days.
It's been a long weekend.
Oh my God, I think we polished off like 4 bottles.
I think so.
And it was two.
And a bottle of tequila.
It's two. Oh my, two. No, a bottle and a half. Bottle and a half.
All right.
Because we finished the other one too. Yeah.
So, Warvey, you are you're into horror movies, right?
I am, very much so.
What would you say is the state of the modern horror movie?
So, just to cast a wide net with this, I think that certainly I prefer older horror movies. I think that there's been a decline in the quality, and when I say that, I'm talking about specifically the storylines. I think that the old slow roll dramas were scarier in many ways than contemporary horror movies that lean too much on jump scares. I think most of the horror movies that come out today are about jump scares, and don't get me wrong, I think that there is a place for that. I think that it's fun, and it's also always existed. One movie that I do find to actually be scary from back in the day, which was, I consider it to be a jump scare movie, is House on Haunted Hill. Am I getting that name right? With
Vincent Price.
Vincent Price,
yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
When you watch that, there's a scene where there's like an old woman kind of thing wheeled down on a wheelchair. It's a jump scare.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it always kind of gets me. Even though that I know that it's there, it kind of gets me. So there is a place for that. I think that modern movies lean on that way too much because it's cheap and it's easy. So in other words, it's kind of the state of affairs of all modern cinema, where first of all, you've got the it's been done before scenario unfurling in front of you. And on top of that, it's just cheap to do it that way. So you're not really like spending money on quality actors. You're not spending money on quality writers. And instead, you're just going to have something pop out. And that's always going to be scary to, basically, like, unless you're completely jaded or autistic or something, that's going to make you jump a little bit.
Yeah.
That's the terminology that's used for it. So
I just thought of a great game show where you just like look at celebrities and are they jaded or autistic?
Oh my God, can we do this? This is actually Dan podcast.
Listen, that's a great segment for a podcast.
I am writing it down in the notes.
Yeah, please write that down. So to wrap up what I'm saying, mine is that point, which is phenomenal, Moses. Thank you so much.
Moses, this is why you get paid the big bucks.
Yeah. Oh my God, yeah. He is wearing a fur coat and a crown right now just to paint this picture. For
he wasn't when he came in, too.
No, he's wearing it now. I don't know where it came from. But yeah, so I have a fairly low opinion of modern horror movies, generally speaking.
Yeah.
There are gems, and when I find one of those, I find them more enjoyable than the classics. So there's a dichotomy here. When they make a modern horror movie that has the substance, where they put forth the effort, I often find that I enjoy them much more than the originals. And the reason for that is just technology. It's that you can do these things. That said, at the horror movie draft, I mentioned the movie Us. That required no real special effects. Yeah. It was just quality writing. Yeah. It was a great storyline.
A lot of your picks were modern horror movies.
Yeah. I purposefully went for that because I like the classics, so I wanted to challenge myself, and I didn't want to pick anything that anybody else picked, which is kind of how I fucked myself a little bit. But that said, I still, Passion of the Christ, that was a great fucking answer for torture porn. I fuck you guys. You're so wrong. You're so wrong. But regardless of that, though, I think that there are absolutely great contemporary horror films, but you need to put forth the effort. And I think that you need to have like something of a passion for it, which is probably true of anything. But the classics were, because horror was not like a mainstream genre necessarily. I don't know if that's even like really fair to say, because obviously some of the first horror movies, Nosferatu and such like that, those were some of the original films, and they were also horror films. So, I mean, obviously the genre's always existed. Scaring people is a business. We all want to be scared in some way, shape, or form.
It's a thrill.
But it drifted into just being like slasher films for a long time, which I also enjoy.
That's where I'll jump in
Please,
too, with the slasher movies, because I actually was listening to a variety of different podcasts on this. Bill Burr actually had a take where you can kind of see where the slasher movies, Friday the 13th, first two, good movies overall in terms of like being
for what it
movies,
is.
for what it is. Once you get, I think it was like the third movie, it stops being a slasher movie and it starts being more of a comedy. It's
Right.
Like, and then you see like you go to the movie theater and like people are like, oh shit, oh that's gruesome. And then for the third one, you go there and people are laughing at how the people are dying.
Especially during that era, like I said, like 80s camp.
Yeah.
It got really thrown into it a lot.
100%. And I look at that and I love 80s camp. I really do. Again, Friday the 13th. But I love all of them. I'm not a huge fan of Halloween and Michael Myers. They're boring for me, but I know that that's an unpopular opinion.
We watched that movie fairly recently, within like the last 5 years or so. And we were both like, so when does this become a horror movie?
Right, exactly. And that's what it is. I think that when you're talking about horror, you've got the different elements to it in terms of relatability and how and that ties in directly with how realistic it is. In other words, if you're talking about a movie where there is a serial killer and he's a human being and he's going randomly into people's homes and killing them, right? But he's just a human being and that's it. That's something which is scary in a visceral way, because it puts that idea into your head where it's like you don't normally think about it. You leave your door unlocked, you know, and you're just like, that would never happen to me. And then this movie,
well, Michael Myers was just a fucking guy,
he
right?
was no, he became like an immortal character. They beheaded him in Halloween H2O, and then somehow he was fine. I don't know what the fuck is going on with that series.
I've heard people that recently talk about the Halloween series as if it's 3 different timelines.
Yeah. Oh, it's completely because again, there's money there, so it's like when you've got this series going down, you're just gonna keep it going,
right?
You know, that's the thing,
right?
But like, on the flip side of it, though, you can also talk about like horror movies. You've got so many paranormal films. Now, I don't think that, like myself, I don't personally believe in like ghosts the way that like girls that I've dated have been like, oh, there's a spirit in this room. And I'm like, okay, bitch. Like, that's not my bag. But I have like a metaphysical, quality to my belief system. So, I mean, like as a child, certainly I was afraid of ghosts. That was a thing. And then as an adult, I'll watch if it's a truly good paranormal movie, I'll like be in the bed with my cat and like we've finished the film and whatnot. We're just chilling out and like I hear something and I'm like, ooh, is that a ghost? And I know better than that, but even still, that placement can be there.
Is there a quintessential like actual ghost horror movie? Because I'm having a hard time.
So I would say that
Poltergeist.
The quintessential one is Poltergeist. I was just going to
or
say
Amityville.
I'm not a huge fan of that film.
I'm not either, but I mean that's kind of a haunted.
The remake though with Deadpool was fantastic.
Oh yeah, Ryan Reynolds.
It wasn't like good, but it was fun to watch. It was fun to watch. There's so many. If that's the genre, like within the subgenre of horror, the one that's been the most overdone, again because it's the cheapest, is the supernatural.
Yeah, supernatural.
Because you don't have to show anything.
Yeah.
All that it is that like the fan turned on by itself. Well, you need to check your electrical. You just hire an electrician. That's it. There's
what's the name of that series? Paranormal Activity?
Paranormal Activity.
So if I could jump in real quick, I kind of look at horror movies in a lot of different eras because like different types of movies became in vogue at different times.
Yeah.
These fucking found footage type movies.
Oh, because they're cheap. Yeah,
absolutely
started with the Blair Witch Project. Blair Witch.
In like not a good way.
Yeah. Because they're so cheap.
That's also like, I think I mentioned this in the horror movie podcast, the draft podcast. Anyway, it's like, that's not a genre to me.
Right.
It's a framing device for a different subgenre of horror.
You're right. I agree with you. That's exactly what it is. But because of how prolific it is, it is a subgenre as well.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, if you get, hundreds of movies and they're doing the same thing, that's a subgenre.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that it's just a framing device. But because it caught on, basically, it became its own thing.
Yeah, it becomes its own thing after Blair Witch. And I think, wasn't Cloverfield also like
It was
film
Yeah.
footage
Yeah,
type thing.
Yes.
Yeah. And at least initially, like a lot of people when Blair Witch came out, they were like, this is real. This was found. That's great
Yeah.
marketing.
Yeah.
They
Great
did do a lot of marketing for that.
Yeah. And that's part of it too. It's that because the whole experience, and this is what makes horror its own thing. It's what's so delightful about it. What's so delightful about it to me is that it's a quintessential human experience, or any animal, obviously, but like for ourselves, it's like it's a basic fucking thing where it's like that you are at some points, you know, certainly as a child. I can't say that like as an adult, I very rarely experience fear in like a serious way, you know? Like, also, I'm like multi-ethnic, so when I walk down the street in a bad city, I'm just like, yeah, I might be the most dangerous person here. You know, other people are afraid of me. And then I like to go and wander around the woods because I'm also a redneck. And every now and again, you know, every couple of years, I'll run into an animal that might have rabies, and I get that little jolt up my spine. But other than that, I live my day-to-day without like that typical fear. And that's what's so intrinsic about horror and getting back then to the first person perspective on these things. It puts you more into that space. It makes you feel to a degree that you're there. And then we go back to how these horror films can become comedic, because if you're too aware of what's happening, that's when they stop being a horror and they become a comedy, which happens at different places for different people. Because again, I've dated a million girls who thought that, you know, Friday the 13th, you know, 7 was a scary movie, and I'm watching
movie.
Yeah, right? And I'm just watching it because it's fun, you know?
Yeah. Going along with that too, when what was it? The Ring. I think it was The Ring.
Yeah.
When that came out, I saw that in theaters. Or was it? I think it was The Grudge. I think The Grudge came out after
Yes,
that, right? And it was
I
like,
believe so. Yeah.
like a blatant ripoff off of it. Although
I think that
The Grudge was also based on like a Japanese movie.
Well,
Yeah.
they both were.
Okay.
The original The Ring was based
Ringu.
off of based off of Ringu,
Yeah.
right? Which is a fantastic film.
Yeah.
And the original The
Ju-on.
Grudge, Ju-on, I
Ju-on,
believe.
yeah.
Yeah, good on you for that. The original Ju-on, it's basically the same thing. So it's just an English translation.
Yeah.
Did Ju-on have Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Yeah, I think one of them did.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
that. It was
Was
that.
it?
It was The Grudge, because I remember that's the
Yeah.
one that I saw. And then like what took me out of the movie is that it went through all of the tropes.
Yeah.
So if I can think of the scene from Family Guy, the cutaway gag where the spider's like, "Don't go in there."
Yeah,
Then I'm like, I'm
exactly.
immediately out of it.
I feel the same way. I will say that I've seen all 4 of these films, the American versions of the basically of The Ring and The Grudge, and the Japanese versions. First of all, I'll just put this right out there: the Japanese make great fucking horror movies, and then America ruins them with stupid fucking tropes and cliches and so on and so forth. I completely agree that I have like, and it's like also considered like a black stereotype. Don't go in there.
Yeah.
I would never do that. Don't you do that.
I was calling that out in the theater, by the way. Just really breaking the tension in the theater. I'm like, don't go in there.
Yeah.
I knew he was bad.
Yeah, exactly. Because you know what's going to happen, and that is very much so a cliche. But I actually want to defend the whole that this is obvious.
Yeah.
You know, that whole element where we all sit here, and I've said this to myself, that if I was here sitting in this room by myself, you know, and let's say that it's like midnight or something, and I'm having like a whiskey, as I would probably be doing at midnight in a dark room somewhere, and then I heard like a noise outside. That's the moment in the movie where, you know, Dan, you would be sitting here being like, you know, don't go and answer that noise. You know, don't respond to that. Just sit in here, enjoy your whiskey, where you're safe, you're in a building, you know, and that noise will go away eventually.
Because the whole, I'm just going to ignore that, does not make for good cinema.
Right, but this is, you're right, and that's why they do it in the film.
And he just went on his day.
Right, yeah.
The end.
But this is what I will say also, and this is why I will defend that, is that if I hear that noise 3 more times, as happens in these films, they might shorten a little bit, but if I hear it 3 more times, I am going to put my drink down, I'm going to open the door, and I'm going to walk outside and go and investigate it, despite how many horror movies I have seen. So in other words, we're making fun of it like you wouldn't do that. Yeah, you fucking would. Yeah. You absolutely would walk outside and get murdered by a banshee or a zombie or a fucking Jason or whatever it is. You would absolutely do those things. It's so obvious when you're just listening.
Another thing you mentioned too, which I think was very important in terms of decline in quality of the modern horror movie, is the character.
Yeah.
Because what was it? The remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, it's been a while since I've seen that
That's
movie.
the one that had Jessica Biel?
I think so.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Or it was the one from like... Because weren't there like 2 of those?
I
the one
think
that was
so.
So there was a remake when we were like teenagers.
Teenagers
So that
is
was
the one
like-
I think had Jessica Biel.
Oh,
in it.
okay. that one, if I'm not mistaken, every single character, like, oh, I can't wait for this person to fucking die.
Yeah.
Maybe
Oh.
the Jessica Biel character was like the one you're like, all right, I hope she doesn't fucking die. But it's if you have a movie, and I know slasher movies, you want to see the fucking people die.
Yeah.
But like, if you have no redeeming qualities in any of these characters, then it takes you out of it. Why would I be afraid if I want all of these characters essentially to get freaking murdered brutally?
They revolve around horror movies today, and I think to a degree always, I say to a degree because I think that it was done better in the past, but they revolve around archetypes, and no horror movie did it better than Cabin in the Woods, where they actually said this movie, or rather these people that we brought together are the archetypes of horror films.
Yeah.
You know, you've got the nerd, you've got the prude,
You got
you've
the
got
jock.
the jock.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The preppy.
Yep.
Breakfast
Exactly.
Club.
So you've got those things. I completely agree with you that in modern horror, you don't care about the characters. Also, I'll bring that back to do you walk outside when you hear a noise? I think that is where they shortchange it. Though I think that we would all behave in this way. The characters they put into modern horror are super monolithic. They're one-dimensional. And
Yeah,
what
you're
happens
right.
is like, I'm saying to myself, like, I hear a noise outside, I'm going to keep drinking my whiskey. I hear it a third time, maybe I'm thinking about going outside. At some point, I'm going to go and do it. When you're talking about these tropes, these characters, these archetypes that exist in modern horror movies, they hear a noise once and they're like, oh my God, I need to go out there and see what it is. And then I'm going to wander 50 feet into the woods for no fucking reason, just to find out what I'm basically opening up the door and seeing like if somebody drove into my house, and if they didn't, then I'm closing the door. I'm going back inside, I'm not going off on some fucking adventure to see like what squirrel it was that jumped into my gutter, like that's not a thing, but that's how they're advancing the plot line. And, so it's all just archetypes though.
Yeah.
And that is unfortunate for the modern film.
Well, it's also too because like some of the movies that I picked, The Thing and Jaws.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You want those characters to win. You want to find out like, all right, where's the alien? You want to find out. You want like you want them to kill Jaws.
You want closure.
Yeah. You don't want it to be a situation like a Friday the 13th movie where it's like, all right, yeah, I'm just here for Jason to murder all the the campers and all the fucking what are they called, counselors or whatever the fuck.
Yeah, it was the counselors. He never murdered the counselors.
Yeah.
Don't you sully my man.
Yeah. But there's something
like when he goes
to
to
that,
space camp.
to those movies, to those characters, because those characters are avataring the dread.
Yeah.
Your dread.
Yeah.
So it's like there's something there, you care, you're driven.
Yeah, and that's
to it.
to me that's the point. You
Yeah.
want to feel attached to the characters. That way you like if they die you're like, "Oh, shit."
Yeah.
It's like you want to feel that attachment because you're not going to get scared if you don't have the attachment to the characters because you're like, "All right, no, fuck him. Let him die."
That's also one of those things where I think that translates through time as well.
Yeah.
The original, when you look at like, I'll use Friday the 13th as the example as well. You're talking about a killer who is targeting teenagers, late teenagers, 17 years old, let's say, and they're fucking in the woods. This was a tale of morality, essentially. That's what he's going after. So now when I watch these things, it's completely unrelatable to me because I'm not 17 and fucking. Well, I don't know. If I got the opportunity, I'd be into that. But I'm not. I'm not. For the listeners out there. Also, I'm talking to you, Moses.
Warvey
We are
Heinstein,
making
right.
direct eye contact right now. But I feel like that's like, so it's relatable over time as well. I think that it's perhaps a little bit different characters, different archetypes will appeal to you at different times of your life. And these horror movies are made for different people. Once again, certainly when you're a child, you're going to find things scary that you simply don't find scary as you age, I love the Puppet Master movies. They're some of my favorite films. Maybe not retro. That's kind of like a shithole film. But when I was a kid, I remember watching, and I forget his name now. He's got like the fucking the screw, the drill on the top of his head.
I'm not going to. I'll tell you right now.
Yeah.
Not.
But like I watched that as a kid, and I was like, holy shit. I do not want a puppet to drill into the front of my skull. That would be awful. And I was like concerned that maybe that was a thing that could happen to me at some point. And now as an adult, I'm like, that's very unlikely. It's not a thing. There's a million other ways I can die, and I should probably care more about like my health, and things of that nature rather than a puppet with a drill for a head. But even still.
When do you guys think the modern horror movie began to see the decline? I threw out like the Friday the 13th series and it started getting a little bit less of being a slasher genre and more of like comedy horror. Can you pick out like a particular time frame or a particular movie? Because I was kind of leaning towards that remake era that when we were teenagers, like the Dawn of the Dead remake. Like that was not a bad horror movie, but also at the same time when you do a montage,
definitely a marker.
Yeah, it's like when you do a montage, like they did really capture some of the horror, some of like the dread in that movie. But then when you do a montage to a Richard Cheese song, it really kind of takes me out of it, you know. And I like Richard Cheese, but still, like this is not the time or place.
I forgot about that, and like I do have a level of respect and love for those movies. Some of them,
I do. Yeah.
Some of them. But, I mean, like, that's definitely a marker. There's also definitely a marker, like, 10, 12 years before that, that when you had all these big franchises going on, that where they all just kind of jumped the shark, like, number 2, 3, and then all the way on to
classic Hollywood
10.
out of ideas thing.
Like Jason in Space.
Yes.
I don't think that was it called that, or was it like Jason X?
Jason X.
Yeah. So it's like once you do
He
that,
was extreme. He's like fucking Poochie.
Almost extremos.
and it was like right around that time frame too. That was like the late '90s when that came out.
Yeah.
if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken.
had to have been, yeah.
Moses, I'll let you feel this before I give my answer. When did
Same question.
long weekend?
When do you think changes happened?
I could see a change when Rob Zombie started.
Oh, that was like
Getting
the
in-
early 2000s?
Yeah.
Well, that was right around that time frame too, like the Dawn of the Dead remake, the Texas Chainsaw
Yeah, I
Massacre
guess it
remake.
kind of was.
Yeah, so it's in that like early 2000s, late 90s kind of.
Yeah.
Where
era.
it was just all kind of
So
like 80s metal kind of flash horror.
Yeah.
somehow I kind of forgotten about it. So he did like House of a Thousand Corpses.
Yeah, the Devil's Rejects.
Devil's Rejects,
and
yeah,
I
yeah.
think there was a couple others after that.
All torture porn movies, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was like the basis of his music too. Was a lot of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, it was like
He was
horror
obsessed,
rock.
well, that's where it came from. White Zombie is a film from the if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
1920s. or
Yeah.
30s, yeah.
Like
So
he has a passion for it.
He
but-
does, yeah.
So,
I
like-
don't totally agree with him about some of those choices that he made, but he
No.
certainly has a passion for it. Yeah. My answer, I'll actually perfect answer there because it'll bring me back to what my opinion is of it. I think that it's been in a gradual decline since the origination of it. I might say the same thing about every genre of film.
Sure.
But what I will say is that when the age of cinema was invented, the movie camera on screens and such,
The talkies.
I think that the talkies, Nickelodeons. I think that was as good as it ever gets. I still watch the movie Nosferatu, which I believe was 1922. Not married to that, but right around there. I think that that's a scary movie. It's slow. It takes forever to get where it's going, but I gradually, in my like thirst to see what's about to happen, I continue to drift into the storyline and into the feel of the movie, which is really what we're talking about. We're talking about the feeling that you have because we're talking about being scared. So I think that era was the golden age of it. I think that continued for a long time. I think that there was, and I'm not well versed enough in this to speak of this with like tremendous confidence, but I believe that in like this 1950s, maybe early 1960s era, horror movies, drifted into this like mythos of like basically what happened with all of society, where you've got just like, he's just like some white dude and he's like wandering around in a jungle and he talks in a mid-Atlantic accent like, hey. And there's not like a lot of substance of the horror. And it's more so like a monster, or something like that.
Well, yeah,
Not a big monster movie guy. So I feel like that kind of lost it for me, but it went right back into it. And I've talked about this person on the podcast before, but like you've got Fulci and various different other Italian directors that brought horror back into it. And when that happened, they brought gore in. And that's what leads us into the 1980s and slasher films and what have you. So I think that it transitioned from this time period where it was really like monster movies, which, for myself, I just don't find them that scary because I don't believe that there is a Godzilla. I don't believe, and that's even older. But,
Even you're going to go into like your MonsterVerse stuff, like your Dracula, your werewolf, your Creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't believe in those things. Let me get that
It's a myth.
Yeah.
They don't exist.
Yeah. I don't know that they don't, but I think that when you're talking about something like supernatural, you're appealing to belief systems that we all have. Like, in other words, we live in the United States. This is a metaphysical country. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in God. And so therefore the idea that there might be a ghost, not least of all a holy one, is not a foreign concept, you know. And also I think that, like, I'm myself, you know, as I mentioned before, I got a little bit of metaphysicality to myself, you know. You know,
I noticed that about you.
Yeah, did you notice that? I've been trying. That's why I put it on. You like that?
I've seen better.
Yeah. So I'm not like opposed to the idea of like that there might be ghosts or whatever, but I think that that's like a concept where it can be scary. Whereas if you tell me that there's like, you know, a giant bear or a Bigfoot or a Godzilla, I'm like, well, I would have seen that shit by now. You know, it's really that simple. I would have seen that shit. Whereas with the ghosts, you can say like, you might not have seen it, but it's there the whole time. And that's like, oh shit, is that true? Do I need to think about this? You know?
That is fair, because like the monster type movies, they're more like science fiction, fantasy.
Yeah,
than,
exactly. Yeah. Hold on, let me let this.
I remember
with maybe light horror aspects.
Yeah, I remember watching what was it, Godzilla versus Mothra or some shit like that, and being so goddamn annoyed.
Yes.
Because like the dial, first of all, like the English dub, it's
Yeah.
it's gonna be terrible. But also like, please return the egg, like over and over. I'm like, turn this fucking thing off, please, for the love of God, damn.
1990s video games, what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I'm only here for when he's going to drop kick that motherfucker.
With modern cinema, I feel like after the slasher age of the 80s, it then drifted into what we already discussed, the jump scares and what have you. It lost some of that slow roll drama, and I can think of exceptions. And sometimes you can also just combine comedy and horror together. I quite frankly, and this is, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this film, but The Babadook. I think that is both a comedy and a legitimate horror film. I think there's parts of that are genuinely scary. And I think that there's also, like, the bulk of it is comedic, you know? But it can be both.
Yeah, that's where I have a hard time, like, quantifying things, like where the sliding scale falls on a movie for me for how I quantify it. But I mean, that's a fair point with The Babadook. Like, mostly for me, that's a yuck movie, and I love it for that.
Exactly. And I think that this is also what makes horror so unique. And I think that this is something where it kind of like, I find it so fascinating because to me, it's like a psychological experiment as well, how closely related all of our deep emotions are, you know, in that like I can be laughing at something one moment, and then at the same point, I can be scared of it, you know, in a following moment. I think that's what makes it so intrinsic. It's why we're fascinated with horror. And it's why it's so natural that we love comedy. Obviously, everybody loves to laugh. But the idea of that you love to be scared is something that people wouldn't normally, that's not at the top of your bucket list. You know, you don't want to be scared, and yet you do, because it inspires this deep emotion, which is so built into us as people, and that they're related to each other in that way is fascinating to me. And when I observe it in myself, somebody that I perceive to be, I think of myself as more rational than I actually am. But when I watch these films, and it's like, it's a movie, you know, there's no reason to have an emotional reaction to it. And yet we watch it for exactly that purpose. And I love when a movie can scare me in some way, shape, or form. Modern films occasionally are able to pull off that task. It's certainly not the remakes. I feel like those are money grabs. But every now and again, you get a good one. I'm going to throw the Babadook
that is
in
true.
there.
Like,
I don't care what anybody says.
Nothing is absolute, right? You will get some winners in bad pools, and vice versa. I don't even know what to quantify this particular style of movie, but like those Saw movies and like
so those are called torture porn.
Porn. Like those do nothing for me.
Yeah, I don't think they're scary.
Yeah,
they're gross.
They make you uncomfortable.
And that's kind of it. So like if I may, with those, I've thought a lot about this. I'm not a big torture porn guy, though I have watched most of these films. I like to watch every horror movie that's available to me. Oh my god, that's brutal. Yeah. So I watch those, they make me cringe. And that's like that's kind of tying into, it's not that you're scared, you know, it's not the jump scare. You don't get a chill up your spine in the same way.
Is it more like tension? Like,
well, that's just it though. But like, that's what I think about with this. It's that when I watch a movie that makes me afraid, right? I get that quintessential, you know, the whatever you want to describe it as, but it's a chill up your spine, basically. It's that you have this feeling that reverberates through your body.
Sense of dread.
Yeah. And so like that can be like, I perceive that as being like a fight or flight kind of thing. You know, it's that your body is like, oh my God, I just watched this thing happen. It made me jump and now I'm afraid. And you get that rush of adrenaline. You know, that's really what it's all about. When you're watching a torture porn movie, you're not getting the same thing because it's not immediate. It's not that jump, you know, it's not that your body just rushes you with adrenaline, but at the same time, you're watching something which is so deeply uncomfortable. And if you're watching it in any type of serious way, then you're translating yourself into that person's position. You're imagining, and if the movie's done well, then you're imagining yourself jumping into the pit of needles or, in some way being tortured if you're watching a Rob Zombie movie or any of these other films, Cannibal Holocaust and so on and so forth. And that gives you a certain type of feeling. It's not the jump, it's not immediate, but it makes you feel deeply uncomfortable. And so then I'll bring it back to that we want to feel uncomfortable. I watch these things and it's like, I don't like them sometimes. What is it called? Green Tornado, I think. Have you seen this one?
I don't know what you're talking about.
It was basically, so it was like a remake of the original torture porn film, which was Cannibal Holocaust.
I do know what you're talking about.
I knew you knew it.
Yep.
So Cannibal Holocaust was like the original torture porn film. They more or less it's, you land on an island, you're surveying or whatever, and the natives.
It's definitely green something. Mm-hmm. The tornado part's throwing me off. But
I think it's Green Tornado.
Yeah,
something
it could
like
be.
that. Maybe Green Heart. I don't know what the fuck it is. But regardless, it's like it's natives, these it's the other. It's the fear of the other. And that's what all horror films are about. It's fear of the other. Jason is the other. Freddy Krueger is the other. The natives on the island are the other. It's all just about our own personal xenophobia and being afraid of things that we don't understand. And there's a million ways that you can approach that as the director, as the writer. They all appeal to that notion, and they're all scary to people. If you do it well and your goal is to scare somebody, then you'll achieve it because it's an intrinsic thing. People are afraid of things that are foreign to them, and specifically, they're afraid of people that are different from them in some way, shape, or form. They're afraid of things that they don't understand, and we all crave that to a certain degree. When I watch those torture porn films, I'm personally not afraid of the native because I don't believe that that's really a thing. Though I guess, who was it? It was Rockefeller's son, I think, was eating cannibals.
Yeah, potentially.
It was loosely based on that.
Yeah.
So that is a real thing. Don't wander around jungles that you have no business being in. But
So I punched this up. Do you mean the Green Inferno?
Green Inferno.
Green
That's
Inferno.
what it is, yeah.
Oh my God, that is a fun movie, by the way.
Is Green Hurricane a movie though?
It should be.
I
Can we
looked,
make
up,
that?
I looked up Green Tornado. I didn't see anything.
right.
Yeah.
I saw tornado warning, and that did not get me anywhere.
That doesn't help.
I knew it was green something.
Yeah, that's one of those movies where they're just like chopping people into pieces.
Yes. Yeah.
Fun fact with the original one, you guys might already know this, but when that movie came out, because it was the first torture porn film, more or less, like there's people who were like hacked up in it and what have you, and people saw it and were like, oh my God, this is a snuff film. Like we need to go and arrest the director. And they actually went and like the American authorities like went and got this guy from
No
Italy.
kidding.
Yeah, this is true.
Wow.
They went and got this guy and they were like, you're going to jail. Clearly, like you filmed yourself murdering people.
You
That's fucked up.
sicko, you.
Yeah. And he had to go and get the particular actress who was some fucking known, because obviously it was a low budget film. He was like, no, this was a movie. Like, this was an actress. She's alive and well. And they're like, you need to prove it. And he's like, I have no idea who that person is. I paid them like in sandwiches. They're gone now, And he had to go back to, because a lot of these people were actually like natives
just
of
natives
the
there.
island. Yeah. So he had to go and find this person. It was like a whole endeavor. And then present this person like in a courtroom, if I'm not mistaken. And she had to be like, yeah, no, that's me. And I'm fine. It was a whole sort of...
That's spaghetti sauce.
Yeah. Nobody had ever done it before.
So I don't know if you would count this as a modern horror movie, because I'm thinking when I think modern horror movie, I think like from the 2010s, maybe a little later on.
I mean, it's fair. It's hard to delineate because there's overlap on all these different things.
But one movie I did watch, and I think this came out somewhere around 2008, 2009, 2010. It was Insidious.
Oh, yeah. Very familiar.
Did you like that movie?
Not really. To me, that's one of those like easy money grabs.
Yeah.
Was that one of the Ed and Lorraine West ones? Like fucking Conjuring and Annabelle?
Yeah.
And all, okay.
Yeah.
It's one of those movies, and this is a modern phenomena, where it's basically that nothing happens. You're watching a movie, and it's a family of some sort, and they're living in a house which is unfamiliar to them. Once again, fear of the other. Who lived here before? What's the history of this house? I feel uncomfortable in a new place. All very relatable. So now we put ourselves in those shoes, and it's always the same thing. That something weird happened, and I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm just going to ignore that. And then a weirder thing happens, and it just advances,
yes.
and eventually you maybe see a ghost at the end, but nothing happens. It's just a cheap movie to make because you pay 5 people to run around a house.
There's a whole string of these movies: Insidious, The Conjuring, Annabelle. Even they were involved with Amityville.
Yeah.
And either The Witch or The Nun. I can't remember. And they're all based on
The Nun. The
Nun.
The Witch is a great movie.
Yeah.
Great horror
different,
movie.
but it is The Nun.
I actually want to talk about that one.
So, Ed and Lorraine West were real people, and they were con artists that traveled the country. saying that they were mediums and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And largely, I can't remember his name. The guy, the main character, he essentially plays Ed West in all these movies. All these are like done, like licensed by their children, because they're both dead, been dead for a long time, but licensed by their children. It's just raking in cash for these still.
And if you believe in the films, they're not quite dead yet.
Yes.
They're coming back.
But yeah, there's a whole series. I was just thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, these Ed and Lorraine West movies, it's just bananas.
Yeah, I didn't know this, actually.
Yeah.
That's quite
I
interesting.
didn't know all of those were connected.
Yeah.
Real quick, I just want to praise the movie The Witch, or The Vitch.
The Vitch.
Yeah, The Vitch. It is, apparently it's properly pronounced that way. That movie, generally fantastic. It's actually contrary to the way in which it might be immediately described. That is actually, and it's contrary to what I was saying before, that's a monster movie. It's because it's about an actual witch.
Yeah.
So it turns that genre a little bit on its head, in that it combines these two things. But it's about a physical witch in a certain degree. My praise of that is not just because it is a great fucking film. As a horror movie aficionados, I'd like to praise myself. That's one of my modern favorites for sure. But what I really give it props for is that, as far as I know, that is the only movie in general, but certainly the only horror movie, where they actually did all of the dialogue in the linguistics of the time period.
Really?
Yeah. So in other words, they're basically, like, to simplify it, they're pilgrims. You know, they're living in, they're at the colonies. Like white people have just landed here, and you've got this enormous, vast area, which is, so-called unsettled. Obviously, people were living there, but unsettled territory that you now need to explore and build your homestead and what have you. This family moves out into this territory, and they're completely isolated in this regard, homesteading, farming, etc., the way that this country was founded. And they speak in the actual dialect of the period. And the whole movie takes place in that way. So, I mean, the effort that was put in, and bringing it back to that, what's wrong with modern horror movies? Lack of effort. What's great about this movie? Fucking effort. They put forth everything to make this feel so authentic and to put you in this place. And when I watch this film, while obviously I cannot relate to being a pilgrim, I can imagine what it must be like to be living truly in the middle of the woods. You're so far from society. There's no 911, there's no cops, there's no firefighters. You're out here and you're surrounded by wilderness, and you genuinely are in a totally new part of the world. It's unexplored as far as you're concerned. You have no idea what or who might be living out there in the forest at night. You have no electricity. There's no lighting. So you live in complete pitch blackness, for 12 hours out of your day. And I watched this film and I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's fucking scary. That's a genuinely scary thing. And I think that's what makes it great. And I give them a lot of props for just doing the language aspect of it. Nobody puts forth this effort.
I think that ties into what was said earlier, is that there's just so many today that are just no effort, just kind of like you crank them out.
Exactly. Yeah, you're just belting them out. Yeah. Like fucking comic book movies, Moses.
They're terrific.
The reason I brought up Insidious, I pretty much had the same basic idea. Like, I was watching that with my sisters when they were much younger, because again, this came out with like 2010 or somewhere around that time.
Somewhere around there.
I watched it, and I pretty much had that same feeling that I had when I watched The Grudge back in the theater, where I'm just like, I'm spending more time making fun of this movie than I am actually watching it, because it's not sucking me in.
Right. Yeah.
But I watched, again, another video on the horror movie subgenre, which I would recommend to anybody here. This video did very well, and I think he made a lot of good points. In this, I think it was called The Problem with Modern Horror Movies, or something like that. McCallum's Crypt or something like that. Whatever it's actually called. I apologize for not knowing it off the top of my head. But like the movies like Insidious brought on this idea that just loud equals scary.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of like an issue now that's, in, some modern horror movies.
Well, absolutely, because it's all about the sound engineering.
Yeah.
They're just blowing you out of your seat.
And you're just like, that's going to startle you, because also at the same time, I'm like, well, that was loud. You're just, again, are you jaded or just autistic?
Right. Yeah. I think I completely agree with that. The startling of the noise is the cheap way to go about it. But when you watch like movies that I personally consider to be scary, silence is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, that's
it's that you don't. It's that you heard something and now you don't.
It's oftentimes like it goes to like the basics of art, like the use of negative space,
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
and like to build mood and tension and things.
Because that's what it is. Like, I'm not. I don't personally. Again, I don't believe in ghosts. It's not a thing for me. I enjoy watching ghost movies sometimes, but again, it's like if I watch a really fucking good one, I'm like laying in my bed at night and I'm just like, what's out there? My brain is filling in that space with something that I just saw. And it's almost like you believe that there must be a thing. There's like this idea of the other that exists within our minds. And I think that it like plays to that, where it's like, you just kind of want to fill that space in some way, shape, or form. I drive around and listen to music for that reason. It's like we fill these voids in that way.
This is going to be a little bit of a tangent, but I don't know why it just hit my brain, reverberated. Just thinking about like old X-Files.
Oh, yeah.
And because that's obviously that can span multiple different sci-fi, all that stuff like that. But
you remember the movie with the bees?
Oh, I try not to. But there is like, I think like some of my favorite episodes of that, like there's one that's definitely very monster. It's the invertebrate human that's down in the Porta-John.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I love that. I only remember the Fiji monkey. Was that?
But I'm sorry. Like I said, it was a weird tangent, but like whatever you were talking about just hit a chord in my brain and just reminded me.
It's that the silence itself, I think, is the scary part.
Going with that too, instead of the loud noise, like I mentioned this last year when we did a Halloween episode. Like one of the scariest games I've played was the original Silent Hill.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so
I watched you play that.
And then freaking like the scariest aspect of that, other than for me the save rooms, is the radio. When the radio, and it's not like this loud noise. It's just this little hum. It's this little ringing that's going on with the radio, and you're like, "Fuck, what's in this room right now?"
And that's exactly it. It's that mystery, which is what's scary.
Yeah.
That's what horror is appealing to. It's that you hear that little something. That radio goes off, and it's not. The radio itself is not scary, obviously. You're not afraid of that. It's that you're anticipating something else. So you're afraid of your own thoughts.
Yeah.
And that's what a good horror does. It makes you afraid of yourself.
And that's the difference between like that type of scare in like the Silent Hill games versus like you guys familiar with Five Nights at Freddy's?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's entirely jump scares.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
entirely just like for those of you that don't know, it's just like a computer game or whatever, and you're just working like the security cameras, and you just see like these robots that look like Chuck E. Cheese style robots, and they're moving around, and that's what your job is. Like if you look at them, they'll stay still, but then if you're not paying attention, one will go into like your security booth and effectively kill you, and the jump scare is just like, there it is, fucking getting you.
Yeah.
And but that's like it's a cheap fucking scare because it's not like beyond that, nothing else is fucking scary about it. It's just like, oh, there it is, fuck you.
It's that anticipation. It's the waiting, and it's the way in which you build it up in your own mind. Yeah. Also, I feel like I brought this up previously on another podcast, but Willy's Wonderland.
Well, the Nick Cage one?
Yeah, it is a rip-off of that.
It is great.
Yeah.
It is fantastic. It's not a horror movie, but it's fun.
Which is funny. So, like, they did Willy's Wonderland, and then the Five Nights at Freddy's movie came out.
So we actually have a mail-in question from a friend of mine.
Okay.
Wow, look at us.
So
moving up in the world.
It is horror related.
I'm scared already.
So the question at hand, I'm going to punch up what she actually said to me. But at the same time, the essential question at hand is Pet Sematary, you guys are familiar with the movie Pet Sematary.
Of course,
is that a zombie movie? And so
it's a great question.
It's a great question, but let me just read some of what she.
Oh, please do.
She said her boyfriend and herself had an argument, and she needs our professional opinions on it.
What's her opinion first of all? Because I want to side with her.
She said this is So his opinion is that it's a brought back from the dead, undead, mobile corpse situation. Fair, typical description of a zombie, but in my opinion, that's not the genre of the films. From what I gather, it's a brought back to life, but with evil inside. Not just a mush-brained, flesh-hungry, walking, rotting body.
Okay. Is it okay with everybody if I feel this one first?
Because I'm just going to start saying lines.
I have very. Don't go down that road. That's cursed ground. That's cursed ground over there.
Sometimes.
Oh, you're looking for that, Moses?
Give me that lighter there.
Oh, you're looking for a lighter?
You don't want that lighter.
That lighter's cursed. It is so much fun to do that voice, though. I honestly, I know that everybody would hate me, but I just wish that was my actual voice. One day I'm going to have a stroke, and that's going to be me. And I'll understand if we're not friends anymore, but I hope I'm still on the podcast.
You don't want to listen to that podcast. Podcast has a lot of history over there.
A lot of history. So my opinion is, technically, yes. The animal is brought back to life, and that constitutes a zombie. However, that is a supernatural film. That's what that movie is. the ground itself, as we all just said, but as is said in the film, the ground is cursed, right?
Yeah.
It's brought back with villainy in it. If you're looking at a zombie film, there's no villainy. There's no villainy at all. These are merely walking corpses that are driven towards a particular goal, but kind of the whole point of a zombie, even when you say it, is that the word is synonymous with that there's no emotion there. There's no drive besides to consume. It's animalistic. Whereas when animals were brought back from the Pet Sematary, it's because the ground itself was cursed because you weren't supposed to do anything there. That's why the Native Americans built it there. That ground has whatever it has to it. And when you basically are buried there, you're going to come back in some sort of a very dark way. There's an evil that exists in that ground. That's the whole point. That's why he uses the word cursed. So I think that that's a supernatural film. It's not a zombie movie, because then you wouldn't have that.
To play devil's advocate on this one, though, aren't there zombie movies with that exact premise? Isn't that like...
Give me an example.
I'm thinking because, I keep thinking back to that... I don't think it was Dawn of the Dead, but one of the older zombie movies where like hell is full.
Right, but hell is full, and that's a descriptor.
And I think when we talked about this last time on the podcast, that was really just like a blanket statement, and it was really more that it was just like a curse of the dead will rise.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, it's kind of commenting upon the sin of humanity.
Yeah.
So there's like a Judeo-Christian thing in there. But I think that it's also like it's literal in the sense that that people are sinful, and hell cannot accept any more sinners. And so therefore these people are now the walking dead. But there's no evil there. You never, when we're talking, you're referring to a Romero film, at least if we're referencing that.
Yeah.
And most of the classics that your average person is going to think of is going to be a Romero film. Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and then they got worse after that. But the bottom line is that there's no evil. There's no one that you can point to. And in fact, it goes in the opposite direction, because the only one where you do see a zombie emote in some way is Day of the Dead, in which you have Bub. And Bub, the zombie, is basically good. He's a decent person that happens to be dead now. It's a weird angle that he took with that, but that's what it is. Whereas the animals that came out of the cemetery were clearly evil, and they were meant to be evil.
Weren't in the zombie series?
Yeah.
Wasn't that the result of a curse too? I'm trying to remember specifically, maybe not the best example, but Zombie 4.
So that's not. Yeah, you don't want to go down that road, then. That's cursed ground.
We're living after death.
That movie's great. Can we do a whole episode on that? I would love to dive into how those vines covered a building in 1 week. Were they zombie vines?
They were looking for medical, like
that was awesome.
They were looking for medical stuff, and there were boxes.
See, that's one of those moments where it's like you feel like you're getting fucked with, but you're actually watching a real film. It's like the amount of cocaine that must have been on that set.
That's what was in those medical boxes.
Yeah. Oh my God, I could have used some of that.
That's why they weren't allowed to go to it until after the scenes filmed.
So in those zombie films by, I believe, Lucio Fulci, no, they did not depict it in that way. I don't think it was strongly implied, because the traditional way, at least when you're talking about that era of zombie film, they're going to lean on that this is like, again, it's like it's a mysticism thing. It's religious. It's Catholic, basically. That the dead are walking because we are bad. We are bad people, and now we have to deal with this price. It's the sin. But they weren't evil. They were just, that's what was meant to be scary about them, that they were just wandering. That this is a dark version of yourself, essentially. Listless.
I'm smirking, not because of your answer, but I was thinking of, I don't know if it was 3 or 4, but the one where they were learning learning how to use tools and guns.
Oh my God.
Weren't they driving cars?
They were. You're thinking, yes. Which one are you thinking of? I don't know. I don't know if it's that same film, but yes. And also, and this is where so we'll go back to Romero now.
Yeah.
Romero's whole theme from the beginning, at least if when he was interviewed, I don't know if he really felt this way or if he just like kind of made it up after the fact.
He's a little bit of a terrorist.
Yeah, he's selling you something. He's a bit of a car salesman, a zombie salesman, as it were. With that, he was basically trying to do. He was mimicking. What the fuck is it? I Am Legend. That movie was based off of that. There was the original movie that came out in like the
it's something Last Man
on Earth. I think.
Yeah.
So with that, it's that they were very similar to zombies. They were a little bit more like vampiric.
Yes.
But the idea was that they weren't wrong. They weren't a bad thing, that in fact they were an evolution of humanity. And so what Romero was kind of doing that, and indeed those other films came out before his film, so he was combining the zombie genre with like the I Am Legend, Last Man on Earth kind of thing. And what he was basically saying with the zombie films that he created, the first three being good, he was saying that they are not bad. They are just another evolution of humanity, and that they will also improve and evolve. Thus why when he got into movies like Land of the Dead, which I did not thoroughly enjoy, though John Leguizamo is obviously the greatest actor of our time, that the zombies in that were able to drive cars and operate guns and communicate and have like deep thought, because it was a judgment. You're kind of like, he was more or less he was bastardizing, I'm saying that wrong. He was taking this idea of the way in which humans have hubris, and that's perhaps the greatest sin, that we exhibit this, and now when we experience this different version of humanity, we think that it's wrong, but in reality, they were just a better version of ourselves. But they will learn, they'll evolve, they'll improve. As we kill them, they're figuring out new ways to get rid of us, because we are their predator, essentially. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question at all, but yeah.
No,
do we have another 2 hours for this?
Moses, Justin, what do you think about this question?
I'll jump in here, and just because it's going to be quick, like more or less, my feelings are very similar to Warvy's. It really comes down to how exactly are we quantifying what is a zombie, what's more of like a reanimated, and like, is it purpose? Because zombies, it's only just kind of like proliferation through their whatever direct mean instinct.
What is a zombie?
Right.
That's a great question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas like to get down to like, for me, it would not be a zombie film because it's more of like a reanimated with malice type situation. Yeah. And I would just be repeating what Warvy said a bunch over. So that's kind of where I fall on it.
And there's a spiritual aspect there. Moses?
I get the spirit. It's a good point of the spiritual aspect of it, because now I was kind of leaning originally. Yeah, it's a zombie.
Yeah.
They
came back to life.
They came back to life.
Yeah.
It's a zombie.
Yeah.
But if we're gonna delineate the two, like what makes a zombie?
Yeah,
it might not be.
Yeah, that's why people don't think that Jesus is a zombie.
Because he didn't come to kill us.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm trying to drink Hendrix here. And not...
He almost had him spit it all over the board in his computer.
We lost the whole podcast.
Because we just had to make a zombie Jesus reference.
He rose for our sins, Dan.
Yeah.
I mean, like, ultimately, this is a very good question, but it also brings up, like, I feel like I need a giant whiteboard. How do we parlance what exactly a zombie is?
Yeah.
Versus like a reanimated, versus like a cursed thing. Versus...
See, so then what I'll say with this is I'll lean on the way that we use the word zombie, because we don't have a definition.
Yeah. No.
So I'm gonna say that the way that we use it, that person is a zombie today, right? That doesn't mean that person's angry,
right?
It doesn't mean that they're any type of emotion. It means that they're listing around, right? They're just behaving in a basic kind of way. They're doing their basic functions. This person is doing the bare minimum to be a human right now, which is kind of how I feel today.
So going with the definition of zombie, you guys are familiar with The Last of Us, right? Whether you played the game or watched the series on HBO.
I am familiar. Yeah. I played a little bit of the first game. That's about my knowledge.
Would you guys consider the clickers, the bloaters, those quote unquote zombies to be actual zombies? Because
they're inhabited by mushrooms.
They're
by fungus.
Yeah.
Well, that would go back to how do you define a zombie in general? Yeah. For myself, I find that was based off of cordyceps fungus. It takes over the brain, and makes you behave in this way. I do kind of I don't have a great answer because I don't have a solid answer. They're just like zombies. Yeah. They're like zombies in so many ways. I'll relate this to what's it called? What's the old fucking video game that we used to play with zombies back in the day?
Resident Evil?
Resident Evil. Okay. So those, you've got all of the nuances of the different types of zombies. I'm going to leave that out because I think that's really just done to make the game fun. Yeah. Because you obviously need to have bigger and bigger bosses. It can't just be the same thing the whole time. So let's just treat it like the general way in which they went about it and those things. I think that if it's a fungus that's causing it, that doesn't fundamentally separate it from the zombie genre. because with the zombie genre, you had multiple different causes of zombieism. If you go back to the original zombie films that I'm aware of, like White Zombie and whatnot, which I believe was the 1920s, that was voodoo, so there's your mysticism right there. You come out of that. You have your religious aspect that continues, but eventually you reach the atomic age, where all of a sudden people are afraid of, I feel like I've mentioned this in the podcast before, but you have people who are afraid of this new technology. The 2 nuclear bombs just went off in Japan at this time, and you've got nuclear reactors that are getting built. Everybody's afraid of the Cold War, etc. And all of a sudden you've got zombies that are made by atomic energy. How the fuck that would happen, I have no goddamn idea, but it's what scared people, right? And then you come out of that, and we progress forward, and now modern zombies, when you watch these films, like a 28 Days Later or something, it's a virus, because it's what we're scared of today.
Yeah.
And like for myself, and again, product of the modern age, that's what's going to scare me. If I'm going to believe in zombies, you can't tell me atomic energy, because there's no way. I know too much about it. We've lived with it the whole time that I've been alive. There's been nuclear reactors, no zombies. So, but if you tell me like, oh my God, there could be a COVID that's basically like rabies, and I'd be like, oh, maybe that could happen. I'll entertain this idea in my head. So I think that part of it is relatable. So also, if you tell me like, hey, Pete, cordyceps fungus, because you like watching Blue Planet or whatever the fuck, Planet Earth with David Attenborough. Great fucking series, by the way. I like watching that shit. And you're like, you know what? Maybe there's a fungus that could do this to people. I'm like, well, hot damn, I don't know enough about fungi, because everything that I know about fungi is from listening to David Attenborough. So if you're going to throw some fucking shit at the wall right now, it's going to stick with me. So I feel like that can be relatable in its own way. The bottom line is that you're just creating zombies in different ways. What makes them zombies is that, once again, they are essentially, as far as humans are concerned, they are mindless. They are, they're just doing the bare necessities to exist. They're consuming, they're moving, they have locomotion when it is necessary for them to consume. They rest. There's nothing to it. There's no emotion. There's no drive beyond these things, They have no relationships, etc. They don't react to each other. These are all tropes of zombie films. So I think that in that regard, yes, they are. And once again, going back to that Pet Sematary thing, that cat was evil. Cat wanted to kill.
It's an evil.
That cat might have been. That cat might have been evil before it died.
In fairness, all cats are evil before they die.
So, I guess you said that they are. So, but it's more like, I would say, like a borderline of your opinion, like zombie, but like at the threshold.
Yeah. I the only reason that I separated even a little bit is that in this case, where it's a cordyceps fungus, the fungus is behaving as a normal living thing does. That's a real life fungus that does exist, that only infects insects, but it's doing what it does, Whereas when you look at the other zombie films, they're typically actually dead, and then they're alive for some reason. Now, I'll bridge this a little bit with 28 Days Later, where the person didn't really die. They appear to be dead, but they are functionally still a human being. Their organs are doing whatever
that is
they're
right.
doing.
I did forget about that. It's been a long time since I've seen that movie.
So really, they're not technically zombies. They just appear to be zombies. So for all intents and purposes, they are zombies. But in reality, they are a living, breathing thing that is infected with a virus that has shut down all of the parts of the brain that make you. And now they're running around.
They're like a hyper rabid creature.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're a human being with an extreme form of rabies. And if you remember, at the end of those films, they do starve to death.
Yeah.
So they're not zombies in the Fulci or the Romero sense, where those zombies were just like eternal. And if you look at all of the classic zombie movies, those zombies are more or less eternal in some way. They can't starve to death. And oftentimes killing them is a tremendous task. Whereas if you look at 28 Days Later, if you shoot them in the center of the chest, they fall down dead because they're still a person. They need their heart to be beating. Whereas if you look at the cordyceps fungus, then that's a completely different scenario, because the person has really become more of this parasite that's infesting it. And so, so it's not a traditional zombie in that sense either. But that's also the evolution of the archetype of the zombie, essentially, that they've tried to make it something that you can actually believe in, that you can, to a degree, relate to in that regard, that this could possibly happen. Again, there's a reason that they don't make these things, from nuclear power anymore. It's just, you're just not going to buy it. You could know nothing about it. And even still, you're like, that just couldn't happen,
Moses, Justin, what do you guys think?
I felt like, I hate to keep agreeing, but my immediate thought was it's definitely very close.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to how we're parsing the rules, but I would definitely, if I had to paint it with a wide brush, zombie.
Yeah.
That's where I would fall on that line.
Kind of like
Absolutely.
in the same agreement though, like zombie, but like right at the cusp.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
If
It would go like a zombie, and then two other like a genus, and then break it down into subgenus and what have you from
my
there.
feeling about it is like if I had to draw those lines, I would go back to that emotion aspect. Does this thing react to what you do in terms of your emotions and whatnot? Remember that cat hissed in the film, right? The cat didn't just lunge. The cat hissed. And that's a thing that cats do because cats have got a lot of feelings. They've got a lot of beliefs. And even when they come back from the dead, they still got them. They're still motherfuckers. And that's how you know that it's not a proper zombie.
We're going old school. We used to talk about cats all the time on this podcast, and we're bringing it back to old school.
You know,
LND.
sometimes I think that maybe Fury is one of those cats that was buried in that cemetery once. Because
he's fine.
He's
Like-
so delightful, but like he went into the good cemetery. You know, it's like it's not the
okay.
cursed ground, it's the blessed ground. You know, and like somebody dug him up once. That's why he's dirty all the time.
Why is there nothing
I
like
don't
that?
know how that cat lives in like one fucking room, and yet he's covered in dirt all the time. I don't understand it. There was tree sap on him the other day. It was like how? He's an indoor cat. It's an indoor cat.
All right, guys, we're here at last call. If you got anything you want to mention before we wrap things up, here's your chance to say it.
I don't have anything.
No.
Nothing.
I think that maybe all cats were buried once in a blessed cemetery, and they were just like peaceful
Or
animals.
cursed.
Yeah. Or maybe Well, I think
Some
we're cursed. We're cursed by
But
the
we're
cats. They're
cursed
also
with
blessed.
cats?
Yeah.
That sounds blessed
Yeah.
to me.
As somebody with you've got like 7 of them right now, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Let's get some of those cursed cats on the podcast. That's all I got.
That's gonna be our guest, the cursed cat.
Well, no, 7.
Yeah.
7. I don't have enough mics.
No, well, they can use one mic. It's not going to go.
Some
well,
of them are
but-
silent.
Yeah, you're just going to get it in editing.
Oh boy. Well, I would like to say thank you to April for the question.
Excellent question.
You're right.
Yeah.
we all sided with you. And so, Bryce, sorry, you're wrong.
Yeah.
But for the rest of you out there, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure that you subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review. You can check us out on YouTube and Rumble. And if you're there, make sure that you like this video, comment, share it with your friends, and hit that notification
Share
bell.
it with your cats too.
Share with your cats, your cursed cats, because cursed cats are still blessed.
This is so true.
Make sure that you hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our content. You can also follow us on social media. We are at Loud and Drunk on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you feel like, giving us some, money on the side, we also have a Patreon where
Couple of cat treats, maybe.
yeah.
Little.
I'm not going to create a new tier for cat treats.
Son of a bitch.
we are at patreon.com/loud and drunk. And also make sure that all these links are in the description for wherever platform you're on. Hit us up at our home base. We are at loudanddrunk.com. So you can purchase some merch there. You can catch up on the podcast there. There's also some cool glassware there. I was like,
There is,
I first of all, when we get a video, I want some of these glasses.
We need to have those.
Yeah. We'll make it
I
happen.
love
we'll
that
get, we'll
cat
get it.
shirt. Like in Hez podcast.
Yes.
I still look at it and laugh, which is funny because I've seen it so many times.
Also, don't forget to harangue Moses via our contact page. He is checking that, right? Moses, you
Sure
are
am. Sure am, Dan.
He's living it right now.
the vacant look on your face. This is why we need video.
On the note of zombieism.
So for Justin, Moses, and Warvey Einstein, you gave me serious Wario vibes.
Man, you love that, don't you? Suck that in, Dan.
I'm Dan. Until next time, I'm just going to repeat this. Fuck y'all.
I love it.